Well, good evening and welcome to the September 15th Community Development Committee meeting. We'll start out by taking roll. Julie, please.
Dan Hansen,
I'm still here.
Scott Cowner,
Present.
Ryan Shirley,
Present.
Jerry Van Someren,
Present.
and Sean Anderson is excused.
We have two sets of minutes to approve tonight. We have Tuesday, July 26th, and Thursday, August 18th. If everybody's had a chance to look them over, we can just let them stand as approved unless you have a question or something you'd like changed. So they will stand approved. Let's move into public comment. Is there anybody from the public who would like to make a comment other than the rezoning request in the Chapter 15, which will be part of the public hearing? Has anybody got something that they'd like to say other than those two public hearings outside of them? All right. Mr. O'Connell, were you thinking you'd want to talk during public hearing or public comment?
No, I'm just saying.
Okay, well, it's good to have you here, Tim. Then this, we're going to close out public comment then and head right into our public hearing. Public hearing number one will be a rezoning request, and Mr. Hilders will give us a presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. The first public hearing tonight is a rezoning application by Austin and Renell Ohm for property in the town of Ceylon located at 2021 Highway 46. The request is to rezone 7 acres from R1 residential to C2 commercial district. The applicant is requesting the rezoning in order to construct agricultural entertainment uses on the property. These uses include farm-based businesses or enterprises that combine elements and characteristics of agriculture and tourism. Ag entertainment uses are only allowed by code in the C2 commercial district and the 2 agricultural districts. A quick overview of the location, noted by the red square, the 7-acre parcel is about 2 miles south of Deer Park along Highway 46. And about a mile north of the roundabout of the 46 Highway 63 interchange. So prior to 2019, the county only had 2 zoning districts in which people could do ag entertainment uses. And in the middle of the screen, we have a definition of what ag entertainment uses include. And they include farm-based enterprises or businesses that include elements of ag and tourism. They can include outdoor recreation. We have some examples of the uses on the screen. They include educational experiences, hospitality services such as weddings, overnight farm or ranch stays, and also pick your own operations. So back in 2019, the county adopted a comprehensive revision to the zoning ordinance. The county spent about 2 years rewriting an ordinance that was outdated and came up with some new provisions. So as I mentioned earlier, prior to that change, property owners could only do ag entertainment such as wedding venues in the Ag 1 and Ag 2 districts. And these are what we call state certified farmland preservation zoning districts. And these are districts that are approved by the state of Wisconsin and verified by St. Croix County. These parcels have to meet certain criteria and is based on a scoring system. So soil characteristics, steep slopes, the size of the parcel, proximity to other ag properties, and then these properties are rated and scored. If you don't score high enough, these parcels are not included in the ag zoning and you cannot qualify for ag entertainment uses. So one of the prevalent comments we heard at our zoning update when we did the comp revision was that people wanted to expand the opportunities. If you weren't in an Ag 1 or Ag 2 district, was there a way people could still do a farm-based business? And so after reviewing the code, we came up with a new designation for zoning area called C2. And it's not the traditional commercial district you would think of. The C2 zoning district was created just for ag entertainment uses. Some key points to the C2 district that need to be pointed out. Because it's the C2 district, you still have to meet the definition of farm-based. The same definition that qualifies for ag properties. So even though you may not score enough points to qualify for the ag zoning district, you must meet the definition of farm-based, which under number 1 is to have at least 50% of your property devoted to ag uses. So the parcel we're talking about tonight meets that definition. Based on a town of Cylon assessor analysis, the subject parcel has 52.9% of land in ag uses. And then under number 2, we go on to define what that includes under ag uses. Income derived from crop or forage production, livestock, beekeeping, forest management, and you can follow the list on your own. Other C2 uses that are allowed include pick your own operations, private campgrounds, ag entertainment, hiking and biking trails, outdoor rec, and single family dwellings. For purposes of the rezoning tonight, the applicant has indicated the desire to operate a wedding venue on the property. It's also important for the committee and residents to realize and understand what the C2 is not. The C2 is not a typical commercial district and will not include your typical retail, office, or service uses such as gas stations and convenience stores. So again, it's not the traditional commercial district. We avoided using an Ag 3 district designation because we did not want to confuse it with the Ag 1 and Ag 2 districts. And again, these are certified districts that are approved by the state and qualify for state income tax credits. We did not want to overlap the districts. So in the C2 district, if approved, the property owners would be allowed to have 30 calendar days of events annually. Anything above that would have to go to the Board of Adjustment for a conditional use permit. Number 6, event plans would be required for events exceeding 100 persons during a 24-hour period. So if they anticipate hosting a wedding in excess of 100 people, they would need to submit an event plan, which is itemized in the table on your screen. And it basically tells us, the town and emergency responders, the layout for parking, the hours of operation, ingress, egress, sanitation, signs, and things of that nature. And then that event plan is filed with the town clerk, fire department, and respective law enforcement agencies. So if the rezoning is approved, they need to come into the county for a land use permit to clarify and verify those items. And then lastly, it's not within the county purview, but the applicant or the property owners would be required to secure any necessary building permits, and that's overseen by the town of Cylon. A little bit more detail on the property itself. It's a 7-acre parcel off of Highway 46. You see the principal structure on the west side of the property, the principal dwelling adjacent to Highway 46. There's one accessory building kind of in the north central part of the property. And then the event venue would be in the existing barn shown in this location. Just a couple views. This is driving north on 46, looking to the northeast. You see the principal dwelling in the foreground and then the barn off to the right. And then getting a little bit closer to the house, you see the barn in the distance, the dwelling here, and then the accessory building over the cursor, or under the cursor. This layout was submitted by the applicant. You can see the general nature of the property. They actually own property that's cropped by a neighbor. You can see the crop outline here. They have livestock in this area of the property, hay in this area, and then the proposed parking for the events when they do have them, principal dwelling, the sanitary, the porta potties in the back behind the barn, and then you see the seating for the various wedding ceremonies. Real quickly, just a little bit of background, general features of the property. The parcel is mentioned, it's currently zoned R1 residential. You can see that the parcel is surrounded by agricultural 1 property, so it's very rural, very ag-centric in that part of the county. Next, we take a look at the comprehensive plans. State statute does require that any rezoning decisions must be consistent with the town and county comprehensive land use plans. Taking a look at the town of Cylon future land use map, the property is designated as rural residential. Within that category, the town promotes the continuation of agriculture as the primary use, encourage land uses that will maintain the town's rural character and ag heritage, and protect ag resources and farming as an occupation in the town of Cylon. And then the county goes on to identify the parcel in the county future land use plan as residential. And then we go ahead and identify categories that are allowable uses in this district. They include single-family dwellings, farmland, scattered open lands, woodlots, ag-related uses, which ag entertainment would be, cottage industries, and mineral extraction operations. So based on the policies and objectives of the town and the county plan, we feel there is consistency with the land use plans for this request. Next, we'll look at the natural resource maps. This parcel is really not impacted, as you see, by any environmental corridors, sensitive areas. Continuing on, you'll see that the parcel is not located within a shoreland, floodplain, or wetland areas. And then secondly, you'll see by the key on the map that a significant amount of this area is identified as productive farmland based on the county soil maps. Governmental agency review, the property owners and applicants did spend time with the town of Ceylon to make sure the town understood the operation and what was being sought. So the Town of Ceylon Plan Commission recommended approval at their July 11th, 2022 meeting, and then 2 nights later, the full Town Board of Ceylon recommended approval of the rezoning request. Some of the county land use policies that we look at, number one, supporting ag-based businesses that encourage the viability and diversity of ag in the community. County will support and encourage commercial uses that are ag-related and support local ag agriculture. Numbers 3, 4, and 5 have to do with being responsive to developing planning regulations and updating ordinances. And we believe we did that in the 2019 code update. We were trying to be responsive to property owners who didn't quite fit under the Ag 1 and Ag 2 districts, but would fit under the new C2 category. And then development in the county should be consistent with the character of the surrounding countryside. Other factors is that the request should be consistent and not in conflict with the natural resource management plan. The development of the property shall comply with standards in Chapter 15 zoning, which we kind of covered earlier. And then for purposes of the committee shall only recommend approval for rezoning based on the following provisions. That is, it is consistent with the county comprehensive land use plan, the natural resource plan, and the county zoning ordinance, that the town has not disapproved the rezoning request, which they have not. The rezoning and proposed use is consistent with surrounding districts and does not result in spot zoning, and the rezoning that is proposed is consistent with surrounding land uses. The action being requested by the committee tonight would be to recommend approval or recommend disapproval of the amendment. And then following staff review of the application and the applicable comprehensive plans and based on the technical review findings just mentioned, staff would recommend approval of request. The town of Ceylon and St. Croix County have adopted language supporting limited commercial and ag uses on the subject property, that the property currently meets the definitions of being farm-based. And you can see below we did review the assessor records and verify that over 50% of the property is considered agriculture. That the Town of Ceylon Plan Commission and Board has recommended approval of the rezoning request, and that the proposed use is consistent with and can comply with standards in Chapter 15 zoning. So for reasons 1 through 5, staff recommends approval of the request. As of 4:30 this evening, staff has not received any public comments from the notice published in the Hudson Observer and from notice being sent out to within 300 feet of the property. That concludes the staff overview of this request.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hilgers. At this time, I would ask if there's anybody from the public who would like to speak in favor of this project. Would anybody like to stand up at the podium, introduce yourself, and speak in favor of this project?
I am Renelle Omi. This is my husband, Austin, and we're actually just going to take this time to introduce ourselves. We've been working with John for over 2 years now, so it's been a while. So I guess this is just our dream. This is what we're working on. It looks nothing like that overview anymore, and Yeah, that's pretty much all I have.
And we want to say thank you guys
Yeah, for your time.
Thanks for coming. It's good to meet you.
Thank you, you too.
Okay, is there anybody here who would like to speak against this project during public hearing? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close this public hearing, and I'll explain to the committee that I'm handling this differently than the last time we had 2 public hearings in one meeting. I would like to switch to the business item number 1, and we are going to take this up at this moment. It will be easier for us to understand what the heck we're doing that way. So, moving on to business item number 1, amending the comprehensive zoning ordinance, section 20, township, 31N, range 16W, town of Ceylon. I would entertain a motion to consider this item.
I'll make a motion to approve.
All right. Seconded by Jerry. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, there's a motion on the table. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Congratulations. The next item up, we're going back to our public hearing on Chapter 15 zoning, St. Croix County Code of Ordinances.
Oops. Mr. Chair and committee members, our second public hearing tonight is an overall zoning ordinance amendment update that we've been working on for about the last year. As I mentioned earlier, back in 2019, St. Croix County adopted a comprehensive zoning revision that really restructured our chapters. We incorporated new zoning districts and had different standards for new uses. When the county board adopted this new zoning ordinance, we had contemplated that we would be back here in about a year or two to kind of iron out any issues that we might have experienced through our dealing with our property owners, our developers, and really this is a chance for us to kind of do some housekeeping changes. So back in 2021, we notified the towns of our intent. And we actually let the towns know that if they saw anything they were having issues with, as far as interpretation of the new code or if things needed to be clarified, this was their chance to do so. And then in spring of 2022, this just recently, we had been working and collecting this series of amendments that are before you tonight. And we did forward those to all the towns under county zoning, even prior to the hearing notice request. So they've had these about 3 or 4 months to review. And of course, we asked for any comments or changes then. And then in preparation for tonight's meeting, the formal hearing, we of course had to publish the required hearing notice. And again, under statute, we had to send notice of the hearing by a registered mail, but then we also emailed all the town clerks in case they didn't get the registered mail. So the towns are aware of it. We did forward the hearing notice. They've had time to review the changes, and we also emailed a copy of the red line document. So in your packet tonight, you have quite a bit of information. You have a red line version of the changes that we're contemplating. Then you have a clean line version. And then we have a simple matrix that we put together that highlights the main changes. So instead of going verbatim and, going through each of the red line comments, I'm just going to summarize the major changes and what they meant. And if the committee remembers, back in June, we kind of had a similar discussion about the changes. Not a lot has changed since June. The only comments that have changed is that our corporation counsel has gone into the document and corrected some of the citations when we reference state statute and administrative rules. Nothing of substance, just simple references. So some of the main changes, 15.280, we are eliminating one zoning district. This is the planned development district, and this was intended to allow flexible standards. This was primarily meant to be used in the Holton area in the town of St. Joseph to acknowledge the work with older, smaller parcels, and they were also contemplating mixed uses on some of those properties. The planned development district would have given us the ability to work with them on that. And of course, as most of you know, towards the end of our process, the town of St. Joseph opted to go into their own zoning. So For purposes of that, we don't really need this provision in the county code, so we're recommending eliminating that district. We added a number of uses in the use table. We talk about farm-based biopower facilities, manure processing facilities. The main reason for adding those is because we allowed commercial facilities, but we did not allow those types of facilities on individual farms, the smaller systems that just utilize material from the individual farms. So we wanted to make sure we clarified that. Scrolling down to small solar energy systems and wind energy systems, the same category. We had provisions for large wind energy and large solar, but we needed to incorporate small energy systems processes for individual houses in terms of permits and processes that they need to get for that. Under 15.285, we did add a category that incorporates provisions for skiing facilities. This use came up partway through our revision process anyway. We decided to add that as part of this revision process, which is why it's included. Specifically, skiing facilities will be allowed as a conditional use in the C2 and C3 zoning districts. And I will talk about this a little bit more. We have other changes in the code that relate to skiing facilities. Another issue we've been having a challenge with is under 15.305 accessory structures. Clarifying when accessory buildings can be built prior to the principal structure. So if you bought a lot in a major subdivision or in the R2 district, which allows 2-acre lots, the question arises, well, can I build an accessory building before the main house? And under our current provisions, we do allow that except in major subdivisions. And some of the reason for that is because of the comments we received during the zoning update. People concerned about values. If people just build the accessory building, they use the building for storage, and then the building gets full, and then there's more storage on the outside. It impacts some of the values of the abutting houses. Under the new code, which is going to be a little bit more restrictive, we would only allow accessory buildings in the R1 district. And so on your map in front here, it would be the cream-colored areas. It just kind of gives a county-wide perspective. So we would not allow accessory buildings to be built prior to a principal structure in the R2 and R3 districts. And on the map on the easel, the R2 district is everything in gold. So the revision would be a little bit more restrictive than what we have now. Staff struggled with that, but if there's any input the committee has on that, we would love to hear it, and we can talk about that a little bit more later. 15.305, we needed to adjust some of our uses. As I mentioned earlier, we work with the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection on our certified zoning districts where people are eligible for tax credit if they have Ag 1 and Ag 2 zoning. We needed to correct some of the permitted and conditional uses, which are outlined here. 15.322, we added provisions to our campgrounds, some additional standards to provide more direction to applicants. We are removing provisions for tiny homes. It does conflict with our minimum size for dwelling units, which is a minimum of 720 square feet. Most tiny homes are between 200 and 400 square feet. We will now define tiny homes as a camping unit. Some of the other higher profile changes. Under our sign ordinance, we will now allow provisions for LED signs, which are the signs that change with kind of the moment's notice, or the flick of the switch from inside the building with the LED technology. LED signs that change in color, intensity. We are allowing changes to be made one time per minute. Touching on skiing facilities again, we've amended 15.415 grading and land disturbance. Because of the uniqueness of skiing facilities, we acknowledge that skiing facilities and some of the accessory uses to that have to be built on steep slopes. So we are addressing some of those uses. within the steep slope and grading and land disturbance provisions. And we can touch on that in a little bit as well. Solar energy, wind energy systems I touched on a little bit earlier. You may notice in your packet the red line version, these provisions have been expanded greatly, but for all practical purposes, we have not really added anything. We've brought in provisions from state rules that talk about processing and rules that we have to follow. So the old code simply referenced state rules. We've now incorporated those state rules into our code, so potential applicants aren't going back and forth between state and county provisions. Let's see. Under definitions, we've added a number of various topics to cover what we've talked about earlier. Biopower facilities, camper cabins, camping units, manure processing facility. We've modified some of our definitions to reflect current technology under perpendicular and protruding sign. Again, we've eliminated tiny house. And you'll see a number of definitions that were added to address the skiing facilities. And we just mentioned the various definitions in this category here. And so those are the highlights of the changes. Again, following that would be the clean version of the code, and then further in your packet would be the red line version, which shows what's being changed compared to what's existing. So I think before I get into too much detail, I'll stop there and answer any questions you might have.
John, something I wonder if we've ever tackled. I've been concerned about quality of air inside of a building. Have we ever addressed that? Is there a state standard that we can incorporate?
Like in a manufacturing facility or
No, in a public space.
why? Not that I'm familiar with. I don't think we've regulated that.
We have had an indoor air quality type of standard proposed for some specific uses during the Board of Adjustments review historically. We don't really have authority inside structures. That's a building code issue. And when we have, as a result of that discussion, that the Board of Adjustment at one time did put an air quality condition on a business in the county, it was a very hard thing for us to regulate. We would get calls of complaints, and by the time they got out there, air dispersal meant that we were not sure that our recordings were accurate, and they had put standards in. And another thing that happened was if we did get there and we had not real high quality meters, and so those were not something that we could really rely on if we were going to try to do an enforcement action. I guess I would say it that way. It ended up being something that we really strongly would recommend against, because air quality is not something that we as a department were equipped to monitor.
Yeah, this is pretty inconvenient to get out there and actually enforce. I understand that, but, and maybe we should be talking to HHS, but the situation that I'm aware of, the carbon monoxide inside of a building is a deep concern, and we'll roll through this because we haven't addressed it, but I've become aware of this about a year ago, and it's been growing on my conscience. If somebody gets hurt out there, I may not be able to really deal with that I was aware of it, that I understand the implications of it. And just because it's inconvenient to enforce, I don't think that should be something to prohibit me from pursuing. So I'm just going to leave that on the table.
I would just add on that one, I think that is something we should bring to Health and Human Services and see if there's any way that they can either deal with the enforcement and have the metering available, or if there's another higher state authority or where we have to go with this. Unfortunately, the state building codes aren't very clear because this type of, the type of facility that we're discussing isn't, there just aren't any in Wisconsin other than what we're talking about. So we need to, I would make the recommendation too that we would pursue that with Health and Human Services and see if there's an avenue that we can take to ensure it, because there has been a couple of cases, there's been one, at least two deaths. Two deaths along with several incidents where it was very serious.
So that's, that may not be a zoning concern, and we're doing zoning tonight, so I was wondering if that may be something that you have considered that we should look at, and if it's not, then we need to drop it for today and pick it up in a different venue. Other concerns, questions having to do with John's presentation, and then we'll start the business item in a second of considering the adoption. Any questions, technical questions for John?
You did mention about the R1 zoning with the accessory buildings. What was the discussions, or what were the, I know you said that was passed around staff for quite a while trying to figure out how to handle that, and I can see how that would be, but what were some of the limitations or discussions on that?
Well, we had been getting some feedback from a couple of the towns that are developing more than other towns. They were concerned with allowing them in the R2 district just because of the issues they've had there. So somebody builds an accessory building, they keep accumulating items, then stuff goes to the outside. And a couple instances, they converted the accessory building to a semi-dwelling unit. And so that became an issue not only for zoning, but also a building code issue in the respective town. So there are some different items that were at play where staff really struggled with that. We do get quite a few calls and inquiries on that, and I think for the most part, people follow the rules, but there are always those that, we have to deal with through the enforcement process. That's why we've struggled a little bit with, do we keep what we have? Do we make it a little bit more restrictive? We're kind of on the fence with that one, but the way the code is structured now, the way the new language reads, it would not, those types of scenarios for an accessory building to be built prior to a single-family dwelling would not be allowed in the R2 and R3 districts. And again, the R2 districts cover quite a bit of the county, as you can see. So it would be, it's a change.
I skipped a step here. We need to ask if there's any public comment, because we're in the public meeting phase of this. Is there anybody in the audience, in the public, who would like to make a comment on the zoning, the ordinance to change our zoning code? Anybody? Nobody in the audience would like to comment. All right, that being the case, I will close the public hearing and we'll continue our conversation. We're opening business item number 2, amending Chapter 15 of St. Croix County Code of Ordinances. So, we're pretty much picking it up where we left off. Questions and technical comments for John?
So to follow up with that, I just have an issue restricting people from building what they want on their property. I understand the enforcement issue with the accessory building, but 9 times out of 10 or more of the people are following the rules and doing what they want. Why should we restrict the rest of them for those few people from some enforcement issues?
So can I just ask a clarifying question? Somebody buys their 2 acres out in Richmond Township. They put up a 20 by 30 shed, but they don't build a house. They start living in the shed instead. That's against the zoning code. But it's something that people kind of want to do sometimes. But it's, not looked at as a safe dwelling. We'd like people to build the house first and then build your outbuildings. And that's, so what are you thinking? I mean, that's chicken and egg kind of thing. So I can see that way out, in the eastern part of the county where people are doing agriculture, you need to put up a barn so that you can put your equipment in there and then you get to the house. But where we're residential, there have been cases where people put up that building and then just don't get around to a house, and that draws down the property value of the 2 acres all the way around. So that's the conversation that we had. I'm just summarizing it. That's the conversation that we had when we did our work session, and we had a couple of work sessions when we did the zoning. And I get it. You want to be able to do what you want to do. But that's what zoning's about, is preserving the property value for the community, as well as letting people do what they expect to do with their property. And I'm sorry to lecture. I really am. But how am I doing? Pretty close to zoning theory, right? That's what we try to accomplish.
And again, the current language just prohibits those types of scenarios in major subdivisions. Major subdivision is defined as a subdivision of 5 or more lots. That's the current code. The new code would prohibit that scenario in the R2 and R3 zoning districts. And I just wanted to put that map up to give you a perspective of the properties it could impact.
So those lot sizes, so if we have a major subdivision and they're all 10-acre lots, so we'll do 10 10-acre lots. And the people that are putting up their places now have 10 acres and they're starting they're doing a hobby farm thing. They've got 10 acres to deal with, and so they want to get things started. And so now we're going to tell them, no, you can't have any accessory structures until you get your house underway. And the same thing with the guy that wants to put up his accessory structure, because the cost of building materials today are considerably high, and they want to take a year or so to start to collect some of the things that's necessary to get their house put together and keep it in the accessory structure so it isn't in rental units or other places. And their intent is that when the house is built, then they have the accessory structure free for the rest of what they're using the property for. So I can see the point with a small lot, a 2-acre lot or something, but when we're talking, the overall rule states that it's a major subdivision. So.
Right, so the current provisions do not restrict based on lot size, just by zoning district or a major subdivision.
Can I?
So if there's a different, go ahead.
I was just going to point out that 1B, an accessory building may be constructed in the R1 district prior to the principal residence dwelling if the accessory structure meets principal building setbacks. That's actually a standard that we had in the previous ordinance. If you're forced to put on, if you really wanted to put a accessory structure up, as Scott, Supervisor Counter explained, for very valid reason, if they had to meet the principal structure setbacks, then they chose to switch it to a principal structure instead of the barn. Again, I think that there, at least it was, from our point of view, what we regulate, it was better, because it would met the principal structure setbacks, and it wasn't immediately non-conforming. That's always an issue for people. They don't realize they're creating a non-conforming situation for themselves, which limits their future use, and we're trying to prevent that. However, from the town's point of view, if we allow that, and I think this is a big part of what John's point was, now that structure was constructed and now it's being converted, and perhaps because it was an accessory structure, it didn't have to meet the kind of building code that you would really want for a house that someone's living in terms of a lot of really important things like air quality and other things like that. So it's a very hard thing to figure out what to do, because, as he mentioned, this came from the towns concerned about it. So we're trying to be supportive, but only regulate within our block. John, I wanted to ask a quick question. Do you recall if the accessory structure, right now, they don't need any permit from us as long as they meet setbacks, et cetera, correct? They don't need a land use permit, I believe.
I think I'll have Mike Wozniak, our zoning administrator, address that. Thank you.
I'd only say if it's in a shoreland overlay district or floodplain or riverway, that would be the exception to that. It may require a permit, probably a land use permit.
So where I was going with that was another way to approach this is to allow it, but if you want to build it first, they could be required to get a permit from us, at which point we would give them our normal song and dance about, hey, if you try to convert this at some time, if you do this, if you do that, you're creating a non-conforming structure. You're putting yourself in jeopardy in terms of the quality of your house, because it's not really a house, it was an accessory. There is a second way to approach it. It puts more of the burden on us making sure we warn people. I'm not sure that's a better approach, I'll just be honest, but if you're concerned about it, these are the issues, and I just wanted to add the difference between B and C, pointed out a little more clearly. Thank you.
If I could also mention something, I'm not sure how this is going to go if on the eastern townships, they can do that, and on the rest they can't. I'm afraid we're going to run into an issue where somebody's going to say, well, he can and I can't, because some places the borders are coming together, and that's where the issue is going to be. I'm kind of with Ryan. I'm not sure about us telling people what they should or should not build. Maybe just make sure that they build it in the right place would be a better approach, and that it's understood a shed is a shed is a shed. It's not a house. I just think that might be a more equitable way of addressing that.
Personally, I'd rather see the accessory buildings allowed with more, either an additional permit that is required for them to build that first, or to put a timeline on if they build an accessory building, they have so-and-so years to build the main building.
I know a family who own 25 acres, and they have, I don't know if they're ever going to build a house out there. They've got a chicken coop and a barn and a shed, and they plant crops, and they live in town. So are we going to require them to build a house? I can't see it. So at that point, I'm not willing to put a timeline on it, because that's the reason that it's 40 acres. That's the reason that they bought that 40 acres, was to put, and they have a big truck and they bring water out for the animals. They're not putting a well in. It's just the way they're doing their operation. I don't know. I just don't want to, I like there to be, if it's a subdevelopment, and we've got 2-acre lots or 5-acre lots, I like there to be some pretty firm rules to protect property values. But I just don't see shaking a blanket across the whole county and saying this is the way it is. I do believe we can have different rules for use, because for use. I think we need to, going back to the idea of protecting property values and protecting people, because if people are living in a structure which isn't intended for occupation, it's not healthy. So I'm not sure that, and I have so much respect for John Hilders, I'm not sure that what John has prepared here is bad policy. I just need to ruminate on it, and I've read it 4 or 5 times over the course of 5 months. It's just that I don't have that wonky of a brain. Now, I think it's good policy, is what I'm trying to say. I just don't want to, I want to agree with the fact that we don't want these accessory structures going up on a 2-acre lot. And then that situation where you don't get a house on a property which is zoned for a house, I don't agree with that. But then on the other hand, this other hand, guy that owns that 40 acres where there's not houses, I think that guy should be allowed to farm. What do you think?
If I could interject, Chair. So my experience, the last county I lived in, they actually prohibited any accessory buildings until the primary structure had been built. So more restrictive than this. And their reasoning was a lot of people didn't want to build the house, to your point about the farmer that just wanted to go out there. And actually, there were a lot of complaints about it. That's why I remember it. Because a lot of people wanted to build the accessory structure first and use it for staging to build the house later. And the concern always was that they never would. On a 40-acre lot or a 10-acre lot where they're spread out more, it's probably not as big of a deal. Really, the issue is that we keep talking about is those smaller acres where it's more visible, it's more of a subdivision, it's a country subdivision. So maybe instead of zoning, you look at it from an acre perspective than a zoning district perspective.
Staff can certainly look at some alternatives to that if the committee desires.
What the current proposed zone that we're talking about, is that restricted by acreage size, or is it, how is that designated?
It's just flat out zoning district.
Okay. Right.
So the minimum lot size would be 1.5 acres in the R1, but your density is based on the number of acres. So in the R1 district, you're allocated 1 dwelling unit per 10 acres of density. And then for that eligibility, that minimum lot size has to be 1.5 acres.
Okay. So then our 2 and 3, or 3 is the one basically on the eastern side of the county.
R3 is very limited. I'm not sure if we even have any R3 properties, but that zoning district was created because there are some community systems, for example, in Boardman, and I think there's another one over in the hamlet of, is it Emerald? And so really that zoning district was created in case a developer and they worked with the DNR on upgrading those community systems to do something a little bit more high density. But really it was more addressed to the R2 district. And the R2 district is 1.5 acre, no density requirements. So 1.5 acre minimum lot size. And if you're doing a new plat, it has to average 2 acres of all the lots in the plat. So we can certainly, I think, take a look and perhaps research the parcel acreage alternative. That might be a better alternative.
We can also look at whether or not we can craft a specific inexpensive permit that gets us a chance to talk to people. Because that's usually the issue, is they don't understand what they're getting into sometimes. What they're creating a problem for themselves down the road, that kind of thing. In the meantime, if you guys want to amend this to say that these B and
B and C.
B and C stay the same. And or if you want us to come back next month, we can postpone a decision on this until next month with revised language. If you have other ones you end up asking us to revise too, that would probably be the best route.
There's more conversation before we... Let's start with Mr. Connor.
Well, the other thing I just wanted to bring up too is that typically most of the developments that are 2 acres and less also have restrictive covenants that are generally written into them on top of it. The main protections here that we would be instilling is if they did not have protective covenants.
Maybe I'm looking at this different because I've lived in town all my life, but if I have too much stuff and in towns, more cities are having restrictions on what can be parked in driveways. Why can't I go out and buy 2 acres of ground and put a shed on it? I mean, I think we're really restricting what people want. And maybe then it's up to the town to say, you can't have junk parked around it. That's their issue, but for us to restrict them, saying, no, you let your stuff sit outside or sell everything that doesn't fit in your garage. If you drive through, like Baldwin in the summertime, when the garage doors are open, you'll find a lot of houses and homes where you cannot put another toothpick in the garage. It's full. And like Dan's place. And I just think, if we shut this down, then what? Do they have to buy 10 acres in the eastern part of the county to do that? I'm not sure, convinced that that's the right thing for us to do. And maybe there are other ways to check that. I'm a person who has too much junk too, but I have a shed in town. Thank you.
Brian, did you have a comment?
Yeah, personally, at this time, I know we'll look through the rest of it and see if there's a number of other things, but personally, I wouldn't want this issue to hold up the rest of this from getting passed here today, so.
So what we've talked about one item, and I know that I had talked to Scott about 3 items specifically that we had questions about, and we're going on 20 minutes talking about this, and these are critical conversations that I know that this has been prepared for quite some time, and it's on us to do this due diligence. It's just that we're together as a group, a relatively new committee, learning to work together. John, I'm wondering if we can do this informally, we can do this as by vote, but maybe we should postpone this. But I also think maybe, and we're going to have this conversation twice tonight, maybe we should sit down and have a work session on zoning and let you teach us some things as we have a conversation, like we did 3 years ago when we redid from Chapter 17 to Chapter 15.
Yep.
With an entirely different committee. And most of what I know about zoning came from you teaching us then. Are you amenable to that?
Oh, definitely, yes.
Okay, let's talk about dates. Kim, I'm going to ask you a question in a few minutes, but if it's a meeting, it's going to be public, Kim. You understand how that works. Don't do an open records request on me for my smart aleck answer. I'm sorry. Kim is a county board supervisor from up north. I'm teasing them. Let's look at our calendars and figure out a date that we can have a work session of the committee. And we want to include Sean, and if we have a work session, I'd like to do it during the day for the convenience of the staff when they're sharp. And I'd also like to include, I think, fold together the conversation of the next agenda item coming up regarding permitting. I think we can do it at once. We could have two items in that work session. And so I'm going to conjoin that with this business item right now and talk about permitting with zoning. So I think we should entertain a motion to table the zoning to a date specific right now with the caveat that we have a work session of the committee in between now and then. Somebody want to make a motion to that end?
So move.
Okay, so the date specific would be how long do you think we need? 2 months? When do you want this done by?
No, I think I'm concerned about Mr. Shirley wanting it done soon and doesn't want to leave it.
So if we have an issue with this one piece, what procedurally would have to happen if we pulled that now and wanted to take care of that later? Would we have to do another public hearing and that to change this later again? Or how would that work?
If you could certainly change anything related to the public hearing comments tonight, and then move it forward to county board at if you so choose as a committee. If you do that and we come back with new language because you leave it exactly the same as it's written, then yes, we will have to have another public hearing, because we have to notify people of what we propose. On the other hand, if you postpone it, we don't have to have another public hearing, because you would be doing what was said, you would be working on based on the comments you made yourselves that is public record in tonight's meeting. Did I get that right, Ken? Yeah. So if you postpone, then no public hearing, but you can certainly separate that off. Say, number B, we want to leave as originally written. Remove that's what I get the impression you want. The R1 district doesn't really do anything. It just, the statement C is what we would remove, excuse me. An accessory building may be constructed in the R1 zoning district prior to a principal residential dwelling if the accessory structure meets principal building setbacks. That would then make sure that anybody who built in the light yellow could build a accessory structure, and they just need to build it principal in case someday they try to convert it. Then that burden of whether or not it beats the right code is on them. If you said, let's not move forward with C, right now, the new C, no accessory building may be constructed in the R2, R3 zoning districts unless a primary residential building is under construction or is already constructed, then you could take it back to what it used to say. No accessory building may be constructed in a major subdivision unless a residential building is already constructed, and we could keep the words under construction to even widen it out more. We would basically take off all reference to the R2 and R3 zoning districts, or you could strike do something else with it tonight.
Bookmark there for a second. I would ask that we not separate anything out, that we bring them for Sean's benefit, and if Dick wants to participate, that we save that for the work session and then bring it back to the committee for approval subsequently, which would be for the October meeting, to the date certain for the October meeting? Okay. Committee meeting, for our committee meeting, right. Are you okay with that?
So I understand that, but I know that there's other projects that are counting on our timetable to get this approved so we can approve it at the county board meeting next. I'd rather pull this issue out so that their projects can keep moving forward rather than.
What is reliant on this particular part of the zoning ordinance?
On this particular part?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I think we should pull this part and approve the rest of it.
There were other questions, and because I didn't want to commit a walking quorum,
Right.
when Mr. Counter told me that when Scott told me that Jerry had questions, I said, don't tell me because I don't want to commit a walking quorum here.
Right.
But I knew that you were going to bring some things to the table, and they were complicated based on your professional history, so.
Right, so if this were the only thing it questioned, I would say yes, but there are other things questionable too, and I think I'd rather have a conversation, a better conversation, leave it all together. I don't see anything in this that's going to change, that's going to be earth-shattering or this needs to be in phase. And I read through all three versions of it. I don't see anything that really has to change immediately. And it's been in the works for, did you say 3 years, John?
About a year and a half.
About a year and a half, so another month is probably not going to make a lot of difference. So I would be in favor of, let's just set it aside. And we'll have our work session, and then, because by then, I don't know about the rest of you, there was a lot of reading, I read it, but I really should reread it, because, we had 2 days to do this, and my life has a few other things in it besides reading zoning stuff, so I would rather put that off, if it's okay.
Jerry, can you itemize what it is that you'd like to see discussed at that work session so that we have it going in?
Certainly. There are some things that have to do with wind decommissioning that we have to talk about. And also has to be included in that, I think, is solar decommissioning. And I have a bit of information and experience with that from my former position at St. Croix Electric. There are a few other changes in wording, a few words that are missing in the script that have to be changed, things like that.
All right, would you be willing to put that into a memo and copy that to John and copy Ellen, so that we have just as soon as possible what your questions that you'd like to see addressed at the work session, so that they can copy me and we can all have the same sheet of music, and you do the same thing, and if you have anything, please do the same thing. We'll contact Sean and ask him. I have 2 things that I'd like to throw in there as well.
I think that's an excellent idea. We can get the information to John so that we don't blindside him, and gives us a bit of time.
All right, and we have to select a date. I want to coordinate with Sean, find out a date that we can have this meeting during the day, so we're not going to establish the date today, but it will be a weekday, and I want to find out from staff when they want to do it, and we'll tidy this up and send out a memo within Friday or Monday. Get that done.
Mr. Chair.
So, sir.
Just to get you back, you had a motion on the floor, and I know you got into a, yeah, I know. All right.
We didn't have a second. We need a second on the motion to postpone to a date certain.
I second.
Okay, we have a second. We've had a lot of discussion. Is there one more thought on it, or can we go ahead and vote on it?
You're going
We're
to postpone till
postponing-
next month?
Postponing voting on Chapter 15 until October meeting of the Community Development Committee. And that is with the provision that we have a work session. That's right. And I would add, if you'll allow it, if we don't get a work session in, that then we further postpone it until the November meeting. Okay, good. Julie, do you understand that? Very well?
Add one more point of discussion while we have it up.
All right, we're going to discuss the motion. Go ahead.
So just one of the other catches, I seen that in the St. Croix County zoning map that you have up there, that you had shown the,
Hold on, let's vote on the motion to lay it on to postpone it first, and then we can come back.
oh, we can come back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so it is, we're going to postpone it. Go ahead and say what you, just so the staff knows what you wanted to talk about
Okay.
briefly.
No, on the St. Croix County zoning map, we noticed that you had identified the contractual agreement area between the town of Kinnickinnick and the city of River Falls for their agreement that they have, but there was no identification similar to that for the city of New Richmond and the town of Star Prairie. That should be identified also, because that area, we wouldn't have any zoning control. The city of New Richmond would end up with that.
Thank you. All right, we've run that through its course. We're going to search for a meeting date and get back to you guys. Item number 3, consideration of 2023 budget requests. Anybody need a break? Quick break? Everybody's good? We'll keep going. All right. Consideration of 2023 budget requests. Mr. Witt, County Administrator.
At least it's before 7 o'clock. I'm still sharp enough before 7, but we're going to go over the budget. So I will take a few minutes here. I know you've had a lot on the agenda tonight, but this is the time of year where we spend a little bit of time on the budget. So up here you have our budget document. It looks a lot like the monthly financial reports. We do that on purpose in order to breed familiarity for the elected officials so they recognize these documents and how to read them. So when I look at the budgets, and the way I'd recommend that you guys start with looking at it is, first of all, I would look at the very top line of every departmental budget. So it's the general property taxes. So the general property taxes are the amount of money we're getting from the taxpayers in order to support this. And the Register of Deeds is probably a bad example because they have a negative number. I'm going to flip to the other one. So parks. So the Parks Department, so I take a look at that. So if you looked at last year, which would be this middle column here, fiscal year 22 operating budget, there was $291,000 of taxes to support the Parks Department. And then in the requested 23 budget, it's $456,000. So that's the first thing I look at. I look at, well, what's changed? So they've asked for more money, basically. So then I'm going to go back and I'm going to figure out, okay, well, why? Why are we looking for additional funds? The next thing I look at is I drop down to the middle of the page, and I'll look at the net wages and fringes. So it summarizes all the wages and the fringe benefits, and what was it last year compared to this year. So last year was $538,000. This year is $553,000. All right, well, there's $25,000 there in that additional funds that have been requested. The one thing about wages and fringes is the department heads don't have any control over it. So we set WRS rates and health insurance rates, and any step increases are across the board. So the department head isn't picking and choosing. They really have no say in what that is. So that part is out of their control, but it's the next thing that I look at on the budget. And then the third thing that I'm going to look at on the budget is I'll drop to the bottom of that department, and I'm going to look at their operating expenses. So in 22, they had $326,000 in operating expenses, and then for 23, they've asked for $352,000. This is the part that the department has direct control over. This is their ask. And so we can see that they have about $25,000 additional that they've asked for within the parks for expenses. So then I can go back and I can start to look at, well, where are some of those expenses? So if I go up a little ways, I see that fuel went from $10,000 to $15,000. All right, well, fuel prices are up. That one's probably, reasonable. And we can look at prior year's expenses. It was $11,000 back in 2021. It was just under $11,000 in 2020. Through August 4th, they had already spent $8,000. So they're probably going to be over 10, maybe not quite to 15. It really just depends on where you think gas prices are going to be next year. So that's how you read the budget and go through it. And then if those two amounts don't add up to what you were expecting, there was $25,000 in wages, there was $25,000 in operating expenses, but that didn't equal the $150,000 change that we had here. Well, then we take a look at other revenues. And so when we look at that, we can see that there was a state culture grant. It was $191,000 last year, and in this year's budget, it's only $66,000. So part of it is decreased revenues. So their grant revenues have gone down, but they haven't decreased their expenses. So again, we would delve into that with the department and ask, well, what's going on here? Let's take a look at that. So that's how I look at every departmental budget. So I'm going to back up so we can start from the beginning then with the Register of Deeds. So they have a negative amount. I didn't start with them because that negative amount is not the norm. There's only a couple of departments that have it. When they have a negative general property tax amount, that means that their other revenues are higher than their expenses. So it doesn't take any property tax dollars to support this department. They're actually adding money back to the coffers, and that money is shared with the other departments. So Register of Deeds fees are exceeding the amount that the expenses are for their department. So we take a look at them anyways. We look at what their prior year is. We look at what their expenses are. Wages and fringes in general, you're going to see are up across the board. Health insurance is only up 1.4%, so a very small increase in health insurance this year. Wages, though, which was one of the priorities that the county board had set for me in the spring, it was structural deficit and then wages, mainly because of the consumer price index has been so high, which went up 0.1% the other day and crashed the market. That's a whole different story. But because of the CPI index is up, we have 5% budgeted in the budget. So when you look at the wages and fringes, that's built in there. It's a 3% adjustment to the wage grid, and then a step increase, which is anywhere from 1.5% to 2.5%, depending on where they are on the grid. So 5% on average is what the employees would receive. That's what's built into the 2023 budget right now. And then very little change on the benefit side. So I'll go through each of the different departments then that report to you guys. If you have any questions, please stop me and ask what the questions are.
Am I looking at this wrong, though? I'm looking at wages and fringe on Register of Deeds. I'm seeing in 22 you had 423, 849, and in 23 the request is 406. They went down.
Yep.
So how is it they're getting away with, that?
Yep, so health insurance, if you look at their health insurance line, we budgeted $115,000 last year, and this year we're budgeting $85,000. So they're a very small department, so I don't know which employee changed health insurance, but somebody probably is not taking the health insurance where we had budgeted for a family plan previously. There's a good $25,000 shift right there. So that's typically what we see. When we budget for benefits, we're budgeting based upon the actual employees. And so if somebody gets married or, gets unmarried and they switch from married to single or family plans, that can have an impact on our budget. And that's what you're seeing in this case is a decrease in the health insurance based upon actuals from the prior year. And whenever a position is vacant, we'll budget for a family plan because it's the highest cost, so that's the most conservative approach. So actually, I think in the Register of Deeds, they had a vacancy when we created the 22 budget, so we would have budgeted for a family, and it looks like when we actually project it out, they end up with a single plan more than likely. So Register of Deeds, there really was very little change. So we go back to the parks. We'd kind of outlined the parks issues already. So we know that there's a decrease in the grant revenue. And so with that decreased revenue, they're going to rely more on tax levy in order to support that department. Otherwise, they had about a $25,000 increase in operating expenses. A lot of that was, or a chunk of that was in the fuel. A big chunk of it is in electricity. If you look at electricity, is going from $18,000 to $25,000. Electric rates, all of rates are up across a lot of different things. You're going to see inflationary pressures in different parts of the budget related to that. Refuse collection is up. So again, these are inflationary issues that we're going to see across the budget. And that's where we're seeing some of those increases in the operating expenses. When we move on to the resource, land, and water, so again, the first thing I look at is general property taxes. They went from $242,000 to $259,000. So I got a $17,000 increase there. So the first thing I look at is, well, what happened to wages and fringes? Well, they dropped in this case. Again, there was about a $30,000 drop in health insurance projected. So that makes up a good chunk of that. Changing personnel can also affect the total wages and fringes within there. If we look at the operating expenses have gone from $412 to $554. So we have a big increase in the land conservation cost sharing, but that wasn't necessarily reflected in the property taxes. So if we look at other revenues, you're going to see that we have some increases in the grant amounts coming in, which are offsetting some of that cost sharing. So that's where these extra revenues are going, and those are the biggest changes that I'm seeing within this budget for resource, land, and water conservation. We'll move on to the planning department. So here for the land records division, we don't use any property taxes to support that. We use the land records fees that come in. They support that department. There's really not much change from the prior year. We were down just a little bit on the fund balance applied, which was necessary in order to balance the budget. Their net wages and fringes were very similar to last year, just slightly up, and their operating expenses were down. And I think it was the last year was higher because I think we flew the aerial mapping last year. We actually have a decrease in expenses this year. We move on to 6410, that's our zoning department. So their general property taxes was 1.5 million, going to 1.7 million. I got about a $150,000 increase there, a little bit more than that. So we're going to take a look at that one. So where are the changes happening there? If we look at wages and fringes, we went from 1.5 million up to 1.7 million. So there's an increase there. We can see that a big chunk of that, over 50,000 of that, is in the health insurance. The other part is in salaries, a little bit in the wages. So we can see that there are some increasing expenses within this and within the wages and fringes. If we look at the operating expenses, they're about the same. So 387 to 384. So really the bulk of these changes are coming in from the wages and fringes part of it. And the other revenue sources were fairly consistent with prior years. In the recycling, so the negative $1,000 here, that's just an error. We're going to fix that. That'll be zero at the end. But the recycling really gets all of the money it has from the state sanitation grant. We reallocate that money out for the labor costs that we have, which is fairly similar to last year. It's up about $4,000. And then the total expenses that we have for that department are consistent from the prior year. Not a lot going on there. Hazardous waste, general property taxes went from $53,000 to $60,000. There's a $7,000 increase. And really you can see all of that right in the other professional services. There's no wages for this. This is the collection, the one collection that we have a year right now. So those costs have gone up dramatically, and you're seeing some inflationary pressures driving this up. The library, that falls under your department. So really this is all formula calculated. We elect to fund at the 100% reimbursement rate, and these are what the calculations come out to. So that's all kind of predetermined by formula calculation, and that money is just redistributed to the area libraries then. UW Extension, we have $255,000, so they're getting $1 more next year in their request. And it's really contract services. If you look at their other professional services, that's the line that we contract with UW Extension. Everything else is operating expenses that they have, and they're fairly consistent from they were last year, within $1. The fairgrounds, they're at $80,000 of support, just like they were in the prior year. And economic development is at $117,000 in support, just like it was in the prior year. So no changes on either of those. So those are the budgets that we have. When I add up all of the departments requested, these are just the departments that report to you, and I add everything up though, I have to add up those general property tax lines because I'm limited by levy limits. That can only go up by so much. So I'm $1 million over when I add up all the departments. So out of these requests that you're seeing today, I've been working hard this week on starting to make those cuts, but I have to cut $1 million out of the budget in order to bring you a balanced budget at the October Committee of the Whole meeting. So the point we're at right now is, as I reviewed these, if there's anything in there that you said, you know, that's great, I love that, that's exactly what I want, make sure that you protect that in the budget, you don't cut that, or I think this is a service that we don't need anymore, you should cut that. Like I think the collection, you know, as an example. I mean, everybody likes that. I know you guys probably aren't going to cut that. But that hazardous waste, I mean, that's $60,000 a year that we spend for that. Now, is that something that you guys like? Is that something that you want to double because you want 2 collection days per year? Or is that something that you don't need? So input on any of the items within these budgets like that, though, is what I'm looking for in order to help me make these final cuts in order to get to a balanced budget.
What percentage do you need to cut? What are you looking for?
So we have a $120 million budget, and I need to cut about $1 million, so it's less than 1%. But, you know, we were kind of talking before the meeting, and I was kind of joking that there's a lot of things in here that you can tell me, well, I want to cut that, and it's like, yeah, we're kind of mandated to do that service. So there's things within the budget that are mandated that we do, and we're not going to cut them. So it's not as easy as just saying, well, cut 1% out of every single budget, because government budgets don't work that way. You have to be much more precise in what you're going to cut in order to get to a balanced budget. So anything that you absolutely love in there or absolutely hate?
This is where we make enemies, folks. Let's walk out on the thin ice. Who wants to go first? Ken, what's the parenthesis 33,333 in the fairgrounds? It's the bottom line.
Yep.
In fiscal year '22.
Yeah. So that's year-to-date through August 4th. So we credit general property taxes every month. So far, we've only credited them through 8 months of the year. So they've only gotten a part of the $80,000 allocated to them, but we wrote them a check for $80,000. So they've spent 100% of the money, but we haven't recognized 100% of their revenues. So right now, if the fairgrounds was a department, they'd be running in the red by $33,000. I can guarantee it's going to come out right to the penny by the end of the year, though.
I tried to save money on the fairgrounds once and did not work well for me. We'll leave them alone.
So Ken, your comment about cutting $1 million, are you talking about the entire budget for the whole county or just the ones that report to us?
The entire budget for the whole county.
Okay.
Yep. And I've sat down, the finance director and I sit down with every department, and we go over every line within that budget, and we question things. And so I have a list of things that I plan to cut from the budget. So I just want to make sure that I'm talking to you guys and getting some input from you. So if there is anything that you really like or really don't like, I have that input, and I know that that's a priority for me or that's something I really need to protect within the budget. And if you don't have anything today, that's fine. You'll get another chance to review all of the budgets at the committee of the whole meeting, and you'll see all of my recommended changes at that point in time. So you can make some suggestions also at that point. When we get to the November 1st public hearing on the budget, please don't suggest anything more at that point. Everything's already printed off on paper, and that's really at the point where we like to wrap it up and ship it off. But that is your last chance to vote on it then and formalize it. So you get a shot tonight, you get a shot at the October Committee of the Whole, and then a final vote in November.
Well, it's true. We've got a department that is non-mandated. It's a nonprofit organization that we put $117,000 into annually. Provides very, very little service for the taxpayers, and it's redundant within the county, and that's economic development. We've got a Chamber of Commerce in New Richmond that provides the same service for the taxpayer. We've got, and it's not the taxpayer, it's a private organization. It's a public-private entity. We've got a Chamber of Commerce in Hudson, a Chamber of Commerce in River Falls that provides the very same service. And I challenge you to go out in the street and ask Joe Q. Public, anybody, what did you get from economic development in the last 5 years, 10 years? We doubled their budget in 2013. We get nothing for it. I mean, nothing. The realtors, maybe they say they get something, but anything they get from economic development, they can get from community development just by stepping up to the window or even making a phone call or checking out our website. We give them tremendous value from our GIS department and our land use department. It would be an easy $117,000, and I've seen their financials. They've got a tremendous amount of money in the bank, and a lot of it is taxpayer dollars. I wouldn't have any heartburn at all just skipping a year funding them. Something to think about. I will admit, I understand that's not with some people, it's not a real popular position. And I will also say that the people it's least popular with are people who enjoy the company of the people who are on the Economic Development Corporation. So, any other comments? Those are your guidance.
All right, thank you very much. If you have comments, you can reach out to me at any time, obviously.
All right. Request for Community Development Committee Chair signature on a memorandum of understanding between St. Croix County and the Dry Run Producer-Led Council and Western Farmers Union. This is asking the committee to approve for me to sign this, so to make it easy for Tim.
Sent out the background information. Basically, we are putting in a grant application, and one of the requirements was that we have an established memorandum of understanding between the entities that are involved, and those entities are St. Croix County, the Dry Run Farmers Group, and the Wisconsin Farmers Union, who are all cooperating together. There's no local match involved in this or anything, but they wanted to at least have it on paper that, you know, all three entities were agreeing to work together, and I did have a copy of the MOU, I believe, in here. It's fairly generic, and it doesn't encumber us in any way financially, but it's basically an agreement to work together to try to improve water quality, and it does outline some of the responsibilities, which are pretty standard for us. We provide technical assistance, who the contacts are going to be, which would be myself. Ellen would be the contact for any grants that are developed and contracts, and the other contacts are listed there for Dennis Mitchell and Tara Dawn. And so it's fairly straightforward, and I already have a copy with the other entities signing it. So I don't, unless somebody has a burning question, I didn't really know if there would be any, but it's fairly straightforward. It is a requirement of the proposal that we're putting together.
And we've been working with the Dry Run people for some time, years. As far, I went to a meeting of the Dry Run Council led by University Extension 10 years ago. And the process has been ongoing for a long, long time. So this is really just redefining our relationship with
Right.
them.
Prior to this, we had different entities that were the financial or fiscal agents, and we had, you know, Extension isn't on there now, different people involved, so they kind of wanted to make sure that it was current. So, yeah.
Could we have a motion just saying sure the chair can sign this? Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, I make a motion that the chair signs it. I think it's a good cause.
Is there a second? So we have motion and a second. Any other conversation?
Do we have an outline map of what that area is?
Do you have a map of the?
I do not have one in the packet, but I can get it for you. It's fairly, there's about 150 landowners in that area. Yeah, I would have to get it for you. It's not hard. I can just email it to you, and it'll just show up, and you'll wonder, why do I have this map?
Could you point to it on the
Oh.
zoning map, perhaps?
Sure, certainly.
It's-
Yeah, it's just outside of our big project area, but it's complementary to it.
If you've never had a chance to do a train walk out there led by one of these experts, it's a fantastic experience. I found it to be. All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. That's that. The next item on the agenda, business item number 5, authorization for the Community Development Department to apply for Wisconsin Department of Military Affairs Office Emergency Communications grant. Brett will give us a presentation.
Good evening. As the chair said, we are currently working with our emergency communications on Next Generation 911. That's updating the information that they have in their system with a GIS-based system. And as you can see from the background information, we've had some analysis done by the Wisconsin Department of Military Affairs. Back in 2020, we were matched at 86%. We need to or want to get to a 98% match. And through these efforts, the state has put together a package of money to assist county land information offices in updating their 911 data, as well as the data that's in the emergency dispatch office. So this is essentially a grant opportunity that opened up towards the end of July. It doesn't require the committee chair's signature for the application. The department head can sign that grant application, but we just wanted to make sure that you knew about it and got your authorization to move forward with the grant opportunity. Yeah, committee action with approval. Yeah.
Looking for a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Scott Cowner. Seconded by Jerry Van Summeren. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you for putting in the grant application. Item number 6, consideration of updates to the fee schedule. And that'll be Ellen.
Thank you. Excuse me. Gotta go down here. All right. So every year we do update our fees and we come to the committee for endorsement. This is usually just a committee motion. This year I am doing something a little different. So a little bit background. We did not increase our fees during the 2 years of COVID, except a couple of things that needed to go up. And so this is, normally we would try to increase by maybe $5 or $10 every year, just a very small amount. So there's not a big change. It's not a serious impact to the various professionals that use our services. So this year they are going up by $5 to $10 with a few exceptions. We also made changes to cover the cost of consultant fees. If you recall, one of the things in the strategic plan was encouraging us to use even more consultants than we already did to try to offer better service, especially in our zoning, while at the same time keeping costs down. So what we did is we have gone forward and we've actually contracted this year with 2 different consultants, one to provide additional review of soil tests, and that was for the most part, but they've also agreed to do a little bit of review of sanitary permits to help us out. And then we've also contracted with a consultant to start doing stormwater review, and we want to pass those additional costs on to the consumer. Quite frankly, that's the only way to do it with consultants. So we are not doing that for this year, even though we already contracted. We're eating those costs because we want to get a good idea of what they are. And so I put numbers in here, but the numbers are actually shaded in yellow. And as I get more data, then I will adjust them to reflect pretty closely what the actual costs will be. And so that we feel like that'll give us a lot of other benefits also. It helps us stay ahead with the turnover that we have in staffing, and it also will help us stay consistent and help us train in our new employees, and the consultant fees this year, especially for the stormwater and erosion control review, will be partly for training in new staff to continue to do our follow-up inspections and that kind of thing. We also rewrote an administrative fee that we had for compliance. Some of our very complicated sites, the compliance inspections get to be quite numerous, and we had instituted a fee, but we tried to do it as more user-friendly by making it a deposit, and that then we would refund it. Well, the tracking for our staff we're questioning whether that's cost-effective and whether or not it's a good idea for staff to not only track it, but also for our financial associate to track it, and then to try to make sure, because inspections, follow-up can get anywhere from 2 to 3 years. And so that's a longer time. We do track a lot of things when people have money go into escrow, but those are fairly straightforward. It's not quite so much staff time tracking, and we can do it, but we think this is a better approach. We will track instead if we need to add on fees and have a lower base fee. So that seems like a little better to go. So we also had a couple other things. Land use permit fees were raised specifically for riverway, shoreline, and floodplain. We're finding more and more, especially as people develop more and more lots that are your sort of lots that aren't very feasible. Perhaps they were platted years ago, but now their demand has shifted and changed for water as we have less and less lots that are near the water. People are rebuilding in the riverway. It gets very complicated. We spend an excruciating amount of time working with property owners, trying to help them get through what our permits allow, what they don't allow, what they have to do, what their requirements are. So we've raised the fee a little bit to try to cover another, for the shoreline and floodplain to cover just 1 more hour of our time, and for the riverway to cover another 2 hours of our time. Also, we made a couple adjustments for large-scale solar energy, which in the past we did not have a fee specifically for that, and now we've had exposure to actually 2 larger-scale facilities, and we think that it's time to make sure we're covering those costs and how much work they are. Same with, we're going to remove plan unit development whenever this gets passed. We'll remove that. And then we also raise camping fees. We always try with we're actually somewhat required to match state park fees, and we match Willow River as our nearest state park, and so the camping fee will be raised based on them raising their fee. We do have a no refund policy and always have had that. On the other hand, people always have situations that we have to be sympathetic toward. Emergencies happen, serious things happen, so then we try to be understanding, and so we do refund. We tend to get those more in the camping situation than anywhere else in our department. So for those, we are adding a processing fee. With our financial system, if you want to have a refund, it has to go through first the manager at the park, then it goes through our office manager, because certain things we have to do in the system. Then after that, it goes through our financial associate. Then it goes to the finance department, and no refund on anything can be issued until it goes through the department head. So that's the process it takes to issue a refund. And I'm not identifying perhaps all the steps in the finance department. So we are adding a mere $10 more for when we issue refunds. Just being frank, we have to recognize these costs. So all changes are tracked in here, and if you have any questions, you had a chance to look at them. We have, as I pointed out, I'll point out where they are. They're all pretty close together. A few that I've put in a ballpark number and I will adjust them before January 1 when our fees take effect, based on what I see as our actual costs from the from one of the consultants. We know what it is, but the other one we don't. We've just signed the contract in August. Any questions? Yeah, Jerry.
I just heard you say how many, the $10 refund or the refund from the camping has to go through like 6 departments? Couldn't you
6
streamline
steps.
that so one person can make that decision and send
No.
out the check? You can't do that.
No, it's not my decision. It's the way the county system is set up.
I think that needs a bit of change. I mean, you're using a lot of people's time to refund $25.
Well, it's usually not $25. Usually, we offer people, let me just scoot down to that for you. We try to decrease those. We started 2 years ago, I believe, offering people the option to get a credit code that you could use. And then we don't have to go through the refund, and it's fast, and our parks manager can do it immediately.
Right.
Did I go too far? Sorry about that. Busy talking. So we try to do it that way. As you can see here, cancellation requests will be provided a credit code valid for up to a year. We talked about making it longer, but it's a little hard to track in our current system. And we do have people who take that, and that cut down. But especially during the last couple of years, we had a lot of people reserving and a lot of people who felt like they needed to get a refund. We put all those back out. We've actually been very successful of re-renting them, but it's still a lot of work. That's another whole step, is to immediately have our social media person get that out. Hey, there's an opening, but we were booked the whole weekend. Now there's a site that's opened up, that kind of thing. We try to promote those, and we're pretty successful at that, but that's another cost, too. So.
And there's no way of changing the county's way of running that through. I mean, again.
You would
know,
have to ask my county administrator about
right.
that.
In the public, in the private domain, one person would take care of that, or maybe 2. This seems a little counterproductive. Again,
It's
your
very
words.
efficiently designed to keep the staff busy. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, it definitely could be streamlined. We do have a system of checks and balances, but this one seems to be very well balanced, so, yeah.
Yeah.
We can take a look at it.
I was looking to recover that $1 million for you, see, so I thought we could, you know.
Any other questions?
Yes. The policy, this is new, I believe.
Which one?
Fees will be doubled for applications submitted after construction has been initiated. Is that new this time around, or is that something that's been
No, it's been
going
in
on?
place for about
Have we had instances?
5 years.
Have we done that?
Yes, we have.
And nobody's ever squealed or gone to court, and we
So
haven't had
they
any problems
complain
with that?
about everything,
Oh,
so
I know. Have we gone to
why
court?
would that bother me?
Right, exactly. That's fine.
No. I
Have we-
mean, Mike handles it if it's for Mike, someone else handles it for them.
Yeah,
And if they want to come and talk to me, they're welcome to do that. I talk to them,
okay.
yeah.
I know the city has similar fees if you start construction without a building permit.
Don't start construction without a building permit. I'm not claiming to be an advocate for that. I'm just wondering if it's a problem collecting. In terms of calculating the cost of a permit based on the actual cost of producing the fees involved, so you're going to charge what it costs to produce the permit. How do you know what it's going to cost to?
We're only going to do that in those situations where we think that it went well over the cost of our base fee, which all our base fees are an average. We look at what's a typical time frame. And some of them go very quickly, some of them take longer. We figure out what that base is. We know that there's also travel time. Every permit we issue, we're pretty much going out to the site at least twice, sometimes a lot more. 1 or 2 people go out. So we have an estimated amount. And then what we are going to do is, if we feel like this one is taking a lot of time, there's a lot of issues, a lot of concerns, then we're asking staff to on those. And we're also trying to raise that base fee. Like this one right here is the only area where I raised it very much. except for this pass-through one, which is highlighted in yellow. But this one, I raised it by $40. Like I said, floodplain and shoreland, that account rate goes to about 1 more hour of staff time, okay? And then the $450, which is close to $100, a little bit less, but that amounts to about 2 hours of staff time. I check periodically, not every year, but every few years, with our finance department and ask about what does it cost per hour for our staff in mostly the land use division. It runs about $45 an hour with absolutely no overhead, just average of our staff. It doesn't include any of our management staff. That's the rate.
Good.
And so if you do
Mike-
that, it's 2 hours of their time.
My concern is the communication with the customer, with the permit, the person who's taking the permit holder. How are we communicating this will be a variable cost up front, and then do you write a somewhat into the contract with them an agreement, into the permit application, that this will be a variable permit price, and so they have a very, very clear expectation that they're going to end up paying more at the end? How is that
No, it won't be at
communicated?
the end. Before we will issue the permit, they would have to catch up any payment. So we can't wait till after we issue a permit or no one would pay.
So that's back to my original question. How do you know how much to charge them if you haven't incurred the expenses yet?
We will charge, as I said, these are being raised based on our experience and recommendation from my management staff. And then after that, this will be the fee, and then this will be an exact amount that comes from the consultant. I'm kind of, if you can see what I'm talking about. This one here is based on what we think for the less complicated applications, how many times we go out, and that won't raise up. And then the next one, the floodplain, shoreline, and riverway, what we will do is actual cost will be additional, but we'll start with the 1,000. And this one is where we've revised it based on, before it was a deposit, and it was 1,500, so I've reduced it from, rewritten it, reduced it from a 1,500 to 1,000, and that may change again as a base fee. I'm just kind of trying to figure it out right now. But then we will figure it out, because we'll look at, we can tell, we document every visit, we document what the staff generally have to do, and we will be able to look at how much time we've spent.
Good, as long as people are, have a rock-solid understanding of what's going to happen going into the permit. 'Cause
We try to require, and there's a few that we don't, but most things we actually require that people must meet with our staff before we will accept an application. So if they meet with our staff, one of the things they go over is what are the fees, what are they covering? People always ask, why are you charging this? How much for? Where does it go? And we also give them all those consultations for free. We don't charge to come in and meet with us and talk about your application and what it's going to be.
I realize now that the word that's causing me concern is the word actual cost. You can't know what actual cost is beforehand. It's
No.
based on estimated cost.
And that's why it says additional fees will be actual.
So
We'll
perhaps
add
it
up
should say
what
additional
staff
fees.
spent.
Additional fees should be based on estimated costs, or we should find a different way of saying that, because somebody's going to come back and say, how do you know it's actual cost? We haven't done it yet.
We
I'm
can
looking,
change
I'm looking
that.
at preserving the credibility of contract, the permit.
Yep. I mean, perhaps saying they would be based on, well, I want them to be as close to actual as we can. I don't want to overcharge people. So we'll think of some wording, I'll change it, think of some wording that is closer to actual without saying actual.
Well, it's not, it's estimated cost based on, based in experience, or based in similar operations or something like that, and let you wrestle with that, but also probably talk to Corp Counsel too.
Calculated cost, maybe?
Calculated costs.
Oh, I like that. Okay, we'll change them all to calculated, okay?
Right. As a contractor, what do you think, Ryan?
It makes more sense to do calculated cost. Unless you wanted to change it to, you have your base contract or base permit price based on so many staff hours, and then above that, you add cost to it, would be another way to do it. It's just getting that communication out beforehand to know how, especially in the construction industry, you know, a lot of us look up permit costs and what it's going to cost before projects go with estimates and everything. And then for us to come into the office and say, well, instead of $1,000, it's going to be $1,600. Yeah, not a big cost in the overall scheme of things, but it's going to rile some feathers too.
Correct. And what we would do is charge the 1,000 and then charge, before issuing the permit, say, here's the additional cost because this took, and most of the time, it's going to be one that gets very complicated and takes a very long time.
It's just looking at the language with an eye toward making sure that we improve and preserve the credibility of the county's reputation with these contractors and purveyors, the contractors and builders. I know that there's been some ruffled feathers, and I want to make sure that we use the language that's going to be the clearest, absolute clearest, and make things as well communicated as possible. So, all right. And I'm honestly not trying to grill you. I apologize if it seems so.
No,
All
it's
right.
fine.
Any other questions? All right. We need a motion to accept the, we need a motion to accept the permit price changes for the upcoming year, for '23, which is how we do things. And I would ask that it includes the request that the language be cleaned up a little bit. I think we can do it that way.
I'd make that motion that we acquiesce to this, but also look at changing the verbiage to make it more understandable.
I'll second.
Right, and with your permission, that we just count on the staff to follow the direction and tone that we've taken here. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No opposed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ellen. We have a new fee structure. Business item number 7, sanitary permit processing review. We're going to talk to Mr. Wozniak, and I was going to kind of direct this conversation a little bit too. We had talked about, I talked to Sean Anderson about this, and again, not committing any walking quorums. I didn't want to talk to anybody else about it, but what I wanted to bring to the committee is exactly what we talked about before with regard to zoning, and this is where the idea came from, is to have a work session of the committee where we sit down and really discuss in detail the ideas behind the sanitary permit process, where we let the staff describe to us in great detail how this works in our office, so that we're not taking committee time right now, and then we brainstorm how we can help improve policy, because I don't want to do that here at a committee meeting. I'd like to do it at another meeting, and I would like to combine it with the zoning meeting. Do it all at once. Plan a 2-hour meeting and do it all at once. Are you guys good with that? All right, so we're going to piggyback this discussion in a work session. The date is going to be, this is good. I need your guidance, guys. I want to see this from you. We're good. All right. So that's the way it is.
Okay. Were there any questions on the handout we provided that we could answer at this time?
We're going to wait.
Okay.
Going to take everything to a work session and deal with it that way. And we're going to move into the financial report and ask Mr. Witt to...
Yep. Mandated services?
Oh, mandated services. Excuse me. Yeah, I was looking forward to it too. Ellen?
I think I'll get a different folder. Hang on. So we're starting with the mandated services for our resource management division, which includes, as you can see here, our recycling, our household hazardous waste, our animal waste ordinance, which they are the lead on. It also goes through our land use division. And then, of course, our resource management, soil and water management program, water quality program, also our tree sale, all those kind of things, farmland preservation, all our various programs are here. And we've provided you with a little bit of different colors to help you to look kind of them as a group. If you have any questions, we can talk about them as a group. There's the recycling program is in kind of this tan color here. All right. The actual doing recycling is mandatory in this state. People have to, everyone is mandated in this state to recycle. We do reduce those costs, as you heard earlier, through grants, and a grant that covers the whole cost of the program. We have various elements which we have to do. We have to have the ordinance in order to make sure that if people don't recycle as required by the state for certain items, that then there's a process. We do not have to have a plan, but the plan does provide us with guidance, and we do it as not a frequently updated plan. Some of them are more frequently updated. And we are required to have the recycling compliance assurance plan. That's a state mandate. And we have to act as the responsible unit. That was something that the county did back when the recycling law in the state was first passed. Any questions on any of that? Anything about that you'd like more information on? Yeah.
Just clarify, you said that that's all covered by a grant?
Yes.
The entire program, okay, thank you.
Yeah. But basically, when the program was set up, it was set up that it had to be off the levy and that the state recycling grant was what we would function within. So that's what we have done since the 1990s. Household hazardous waste, on the other hand, which is not covered under recycling, is not, we used to have a larger grant that used to cover the majority of it. That grant has been around 15, 16, 17,000 for many years now. It was reduced by the state, and that is one item that is on your tax levy. And it's not mandated. The items that are to be collected at a hazardous waste are part of the state law that are not to go into a landfill, but it's not mandated that we hold the collection program. And that budget is 100% for the collection program.
Just a question, I know we've talked about it before, about clean sweep, and you talked about increasing costs that we're passing on to those that are recycling. Can you go through that just a little bit on this next clean sweep? Those prices are going up again. Are we looking at increasing those again in this next budget? Is that part of that?
So a couple of things we've been doing. We used to hold, Ken actually mentioned this, we used to hold 2 clean sweeps a year, spring and fall. And we used to only charge for a very few things that the disposal company was able to, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. I think it's 3 years ago now, we started a fee for paints because we constantly had requests to go to paints. And we also, a few years ago, went to one collection. One of the reasons, the first time we did it in 2020, we had done it periodically, historically, but we'd gone back to 2. So we went to 1 the first year in 2020 because of COVID, okay? Then 2021, we went there because of budget, and 2022 here, we're having 1 because of budget. The disposal and even staffing costs have just really zoomed up. We used to do this program for less than 50,000, and now we're pushing 80. We have done things to reduce those costs. We started in a fee to residents, and that fee to residents originally was one amount, and then we changed it and made it that it's just a fee. And we charge it for any paint, stain, or varnishes, that kind of thing that comes into the program. It's not every single person has to pay it, but it's all those things that we consider there are alternative disposal routes, okay? That helped. I mean, we collected 15,000, so that certainly helps. That 80,000 we're pushing is with a $15,000 budget revenue estimated. Can't know exactly how much it's going to be. We also have a new company that started up a few years ago in St. Croix County called Logistics Recycling out of Somerset. Logistics Recycling does take hazardous waste, and they started up as a business that wanted to cater to businesses, other businesses. But they have agreed, we've worked with them, we've talked with them, and they do take drive-ups, and then they just charge them, whatever the cost is. And so in an effort to look at, this program might have to change, County Board might tell us it has to change. We've been working with Logistics Recycling. One of the things we did, and I will also back up and say that we have bid out, we have fought to find cheaper prices for disposal. There are very, very few vendors out there to pick from. So this year, Logistics Recycling is our vendor, and we thought that would be a good transition. Next year, we hope to have Logistics Recycling be the vendor at their existing facility for our one-year event, one-time event. And then after that, we're talking, we can keep raising fees. I will say that when you ask me, do I get angry people about fees, a lot of people were really good. You know, we get about 500 people we run through households through a clean sweep. That's a lot of people in 2 days. And most of them have all good things to say, but we definitely have a few extremely angry people, okay? They're good with their phones. I always try to warn you, when we have our clean sweep, you may get a nasty email, because I've had county board members that got them before. So just so you know. But what we're looking at is maybe transitioning it to Logistics Recycling and just promoting it for them and trying to help. That's where we're at, based on direction from the committee and the county board. But we are going to do this year's, and in order to transition, we were looking at doing next year's too. I guess that will depend on you guys.
Jerry?
What is the expense, the $80,000 expense, is that in manpower, or is that what the recycling place charges?
It's both. See,
Okay.
hazardous waste, you have to have, we fill about 2 semi-loads. We're the biggest clean sweep they do, that the various vendors do. They bring quite a bit of manpower to stay ahead of how much comes in. They have to box things separately, and they spend quite a bit of time after the collection time frame is over with, the next 4 or 5 hours, finalizing the sorting that they've been doing all along. We have most of our staff volunteer to direct traffic. They're not directing traffic. We do all the legwork type stuff. We even help unload cars, but we don't sort hazardous waste. Now, a lot of people, hazardous waste is not hazardous when you buy it at the grocery store or at the farm co-op, but the minute it enters that location, it's a hazardous waste. And once that is, it has to be handled in a certain way. And then it goes to licensed, federally licensed hazardous waste disposal sites, many of which are many states away. And there's a paper trail for every box, for every container. We get manifests on where everything goes for the paperwork. We get guarantees that it did not get dumped illegally in some lake or stream or river or just illegally buried. That's what all that pays for, and the cost of doing that has really gone up. And most of the employees who work for the company are either trained or they're college students with partial chemistry degrees. That's what it tends to be.
And my reason for asking that was, So would volunteer help that out? But it sounds like the county people are taking care of that and the others. So
Yep.
that's my reason for asking.
We've had a
Thank
lot of
you.
our staff are encouraged to volunteer, and they do. And we have had citizens, a few, volunteer. I've even had public health people come and volunteer because they believe in the program.
I'm gonna throw in here that this is extremely popular with the community. You know, Ryan, because you're from our community, that 195th Avenue that runs behind where the old landfill is, toward the compost dump. You've seen how people just throw stuff in the ditch there, and there's one of those in every community. That's what happens if you don't have a hazardous waste collection, and it's a service to the whole community to be able to do this at least once a year. And I regret that we can't do it twice a year. So I guess, in my opinion, and my feeling is that it's something that's worth putting on the levy.
Anything else on that for now? Go ahead.
My other question earlier was, in this next go-around and in the next budget, are you looking at increasing those fees to try to offset some of those costs? Or are you sticking with what you did last year?
I showed an increase based on what our staff are estimating it will end up costing us this year of about $7,000. If we're given less money, what we will do is cut the hours that we are open. The shorter hours means we can't collect as much. And that won't be popular, but that's a way to keep the cost down. And that's what we'll have to do. Or we will do that and we'll raise, right now, okay, make sure I got the numbers right. We charge $5 for a gallon of anything, whether it's full, partially full, or whatever. And is that right? 5? Yep. And we charge $25 for a 5-gallon pail. We do worry that businesses who should be paying, because if you don't recall, if a business, we call it a VSQG, a very small quantity generator, a business who really can't afford to hire someone to come and take their hazardous waste on a weekly or monthly basis, they can come once a year and pay whatever the cost is. We've always done it that way. And we also take from farmers for free, and up to a certain weight, and then if it's over that weight, the farmer has to pay. We get a lot of material from those two sources, but they should be paid for, or the first one should be. And the one grant that we get is heavily focused on agriculture, so that's mostly paid for too. But the rest of it, the county's subsidizing, to be frank. Okay, got a lot to go through. Animal waste ordinance is not mandated, but we have had an animal waste ordinance in this county since 1987, I believe, and because that's what the citizens have wanted, and we regulate animal waste by agricultural usage, and we are pretty close, but a little bit more restrictive than the state law. We have the right to be because we had a pre-existing ordinance to the state law. I think that based on the concern the public has for groundwater right now, that is an extremely important ordinance, and if anything, they have been pushing us very hard to get enough data and information so that perhaps that ordinance could be expanded or strengthened, might be the word. Resource management, these are very important programs. They are mandated. They're a high priority for us. Basically, we are working at soil and water conservation. In our soil and water conservation, Tim could speak very eloquently about it, and he's here to do so if you would like him to. But the soil and water plan is something that has been around in one version or another, going back all the way to after the Dust Bowl, as we came out of the Dust Bowl in the 30s. Soil and water conservation is a priority of the federal government, and they pass that down through the states and through us. We get a significant amount of grants in land and water conservation, our resource management team, and those grants are focused on best management practices and other activities that we are always working with farmers to adopt, incorporate, apply, cover crops, all kinds of things. And there's always some new technique, again, always focused on protecting our soil and water resources in this county and throughout the state and the nation. Any questions? Okay. Next month, oh wait, I'm not quite done. There are some parts of it I see here. Sorry, didn't go far enough. This is a funding program. These that say no, the funding program is pretty straightforward. We spend every dollar of that grant every year. Our match is really our staff time. So, couple other parts of that program, our native tree and plant program. You guys have heard about it a little bit already. That is extremely popular. There's about 40 or 50 of the counties in the state that run a tree and plant program. It's popular everywhere we do it. It's about reforestation. It's also about soil protection because of planting. We work with wholesalers, and then we purchase and resell the trees and the shrubs. They're all native. We resell them just slightly above cost, just enough to cover our expenses. And that program actually does bring in a tiny bit of revenue, and we apply that revenue to environmental education or specific programs. As I mentioned at the county board meeting, we've been applying it lately, last few years, to offset costs for our water quality program, our groundwater testing, that kind of thing. In here, there's a lot of other great information. Our farmland preservation program, which is another program that the state sponsors and is required. Every county in the state must have a farmland preservation plan and then work with farmers to try to preserve agriculture through a variety of basically a three-pronged approach. I won't get into that unless you'd like us to, and then I'll probably have Tim come up and talk. We also have a couple other programs. The state, the federal government, and through the Clean Water Act, requires a total maximum daily load of phosphorus and other pollutants that any water body can accept. Unfortunately, St. Croix County has now reached the point where a great deal of it is under a total maximum daily load directive, requirement, number, all those words. Tim's nodding. 3/4 of St. Croix County. We have been able, because of that, to get very large grants. That's part of what you see in our budget. You saw how sometimes we're kind of a little bit up and down in that division. Okay, we get a grant, we work on spending it, we do our best. Sometimes we work with farmers and it's a 3-year grant and the majority of the money might go out the 3rd year. We always kind of write it, a third, or half and half. Doesn't always work out the way we plan. You have to get the cooperation of rural landowners. But that is something that we're required to work on and try to reduce it. We have been making a lot of progress. I don't know that we're going to meet it. These are long-term goals, but we are working very hard at it and very aggressively pursuing grants and trying to work with agricultural producers and other rural landowners.
I have a question, Ellen.
Mm-hmm.
Ellen, with that one, with the total maximum daily loads, this is kind of interrelated, but how are we situated with trying to work that type of issue with the loads that we're picking up from, like, some of the hamlets that have wastewater treatment facilities that are pretty well outdated and stuff? Is there anything that's going to be in there that's going to be able to help us, like Forest and Deer Park and Holton and such?
We don't really have any authority over those systems. The DNR has regulatory authority over those systems. Town of Richmond is a good one in Boardman. A lot of those systems were designed for more properties to be on them, and when they operate under capacity, they operate very poorly, very, very poorly. And they've also reached the point where it would cost a lot of money to bring them up to code. And there's also the situation where there's not enough property owners who want to do that. And in the town of Emerald, which is right on their system is right on the edge of Emerald and Glenwood, so a lot of people forget it because it's actually an Emerald Glenwood facility. That one, for instance, they actually have always had a full-time person. They paid for it. The people have, and they've added some little houses and businesses here and there over the years. Theirs is in better shape than many of the other ones because they've been proactive. But sometimes they're not. But we don't really have any authority. In my past, I've gone to meetings where they've talked about how could we fix the one, for instance, in Boardman, fix the problems. Until someone gives them some great big grant donation or something, I don't know what, the DNR didn't have many solutions for them either. Sure, come on.
The problem is the water is not meeting the standard. So when the water doesn't meet the standard over a whole area, all those communities are in a real difficult situation. So when they want to expand their treatment facilities, they end up doing what the village of Roberts had to do, which was put in an extremely expensive system, which is very difficult because they are not allowed to release any into in a TMDL area. So how we can help is if we can help get the water cleaner through working with agriculture through our normal means, that will take some of the pressure off, but that is going to take a long time to do it. Right now, the city of New Richmond is trying to decide how they're going to meet those high requirements. And they've decided to do what's called adaptive management, which is put money into BMPs in the watershed to help meet instead of putting the money into the treatment plant. And I'm trying to interest them in working with us on that. So there's a little interface with resource management, but it has to be done. And as a matter of fact, we've taken some of the money from some of the other municipalities that have had to, instead of upgrading their facilities, they pay into a fund, and we've gotten a little of that. Yeah.
With that, I know, was there also some studies that were done to try to help with some of this that was part of the bridge funds?
That was a little different, but yeah.
So what happened there was there was specific money set aside, and an organization was created called the Highway 64 Corridor Group, and that Highway 64 Corridor Group had the decisions on how to spend the money that was set aside for them, and they did. They did some plant upgrades in New Richmond. They did studies of stormwater, and they did studies out in the rural areas, and they worked with Deer Park. Deer Park got some improvements done, but obviously it wasn't necessarily enough. Somerset got some things done too. So the last two programs, the wildlife damage program is a pass-through program. What it is if any farmer or property owner has damage from wildlife, bears, wolves, coyotes, things like that, this is basically a state program, and we administer it. And we don't even administer it. We actually hire Barron County to administer it, but we do all the paperwork for the financial part. We write the checks to a farmer in St. Croix County, and we write the paperwork that gets the money reimbursed to us. So this is no cost to county. It's just we're processing it and doing it as a benefit to our farmers. I shouldn't say no cost. There's some staff costs, but there's no out-of-pocket, no direct levy cost. And we use Barron County because they offer to do it at a really reasonable price, and they do it for, I think, 6 other counties total. So it makes it much more cost-effective. And that portion, their expenses are totally reimbursed by the state. Our drinking water testing program, it's in our Land and Water Resource Management Plan. It's also in our ground and surface water priority recommendations, both documents adopted by our former county boards. It's a priority, it's very popular, it's something that came out of a lot of citizen concern and a lot of citizen demand for do something about the quality of our groundwater and our drinking water. We're trying to address nitrates, we're trying to build a database that would allow us to try to identify where the problems are most acute in the county, because we're testing all across the county, data that would also allow us to look at reasonable changes to our agricultural operations and codifying those in regulations, which we can only do with a lot of data and a lot of proof, because they would have to all be approved by the state. So that's trying to condense a huge amount of information into 2 sentences, so.
This is the program that you made an appeal for further funding that we've run down the money that was available for, is this right?
Correct. Originally, there was $50,000 approximately the county board had set aside, and right now I'm using a variety of little pieces of money. Like I mentioned, the additional money that comes from the native tree and plant sale, and some fund balance that we apply every year. I'm putting together really about 3 different pieces, and I'm keeping that alive. Our fund balance, we have 2 or 3 years left before the various things we do with it are, well, the money will be gone. We've been spending $100,000 a year, and that money has gone to little programs like that. It's also gone towards what we address, excuse me, we have about $40,000 that we've been putting towards doing more well abandonments, which is directly a relationship to the drinking water program. It's one of the best ways we can protect our groundwater. We used to only do a couple, all we could afford to do was cost share on maybe 2 drinking water well abandonments a year. And ever since we started using some of that fund balance, we're able to do anyone who comes in the door. We used to have a waiting list. We also had a waiting list of farmers who were willing to properly abandon old manure pits. We could maybe do 1 a year because of the money we would get from the state. Ever since we started using the fund balance to try to be more aggressive at protecting our groundwater, which we actually started before the whole drinking water issue came up, we've been able to keep ahead. Any farmer who comes in the door now, we've caught up. Anybody who comes in the door willing to properly abandon an old manure pit, we could do. Otherwise, they were sitting around, sometimes full, and just, there was nothing we could legally do.
I'm going to interject an editorial comment here. Protecting drinking water has been one of my most important goals since I've been elected, and I'd ask you guys to help find that 15 grand if that's possible, because every farmer I've ever talked to insists that they need clean drinking water for their animals and for their crops, and I agree. You know, protecting groundwater is like one of our main missions, just to keep everybody healthy. So that's what Tim Stever's all about. That's what Ellen Denzer's all about. That's what I'm all about, and I'm asking you to join me in the effort. So.
And we have the money for this year. The fund balance isn't gone. It's, Ken and I have talked about it. It's going to be gone in about 2 to 3 years. Either next year and the year after, or next year, the year after, and maybe half of another year. Excuse me. And then we're going to have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do?
So for 1/6 of a F-150 pickup truck, you can extend water testing for another couple of years, huh?
Yeah, eventually I'm going to need, and if you want to do other things, but that absolute minimum is that 15,000, and then there's other, like that won't cover well abandonments, it won't cover manure pit abandonments, it won't cover the other things we do, but it will cover all the testing.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that in depth and see what you really need for everything, and look at it hard, because we can't let those programs, I can't see letting those programs die. We need to cut some other things, but we can't let those programs die.
Well, again, you don't have to do that for 2023. I'm just trying to help Ken out here. You don't have to do it for 2023. Yeah, but I want you to know, because there will be a day when we'll say we're not doing it anymore. We don't have the money. You could tell me to stop doing the wildlife damage program, but that's a pass-through. You could tell me to stop doing the tree and plant sale, but that's where I get an extra $10,000 that I put towards the water quality. You could tell me to stop doing environmental education, but that program is it's a contract person, and they do work 9 months of the year for about $25,000, $27,000. It's amazingly great deal, and they're educating children and adults, and it's just the cost-benefit ratio is huge on that one. So what do we give up? I don't know, because they're educating our next generation of people. That person is. So we have got to keep working with our farmers. I don't know that I have places to tell you where to go to change things. So just putting that out there. Okay? That's all I have on our mandated services. Do you have any more questions on this division's mandated services?
This is a very good report. Thank you for your time and effort.
Welcome.
I know it takes a great deal of time to do this. You did a great job. All right, well, I've been looking forward to this all week. Financial report.
So the financial reports in the packet, you'll see that it looks very similar to the budget that we have. So one of the neat things you can do now is, we talked about the budget, but you can look at where we're at on these expenses. It's reasonable for you. So that register of deeds fees that we have on there, so you can look at the amount of collection that we had. So we've broken $1 million the last couple of years. We're at $749,000 through the end of August. So it looks like we're on target to hit about that $1 million mark again this year. Register of deeds, it's one of the things I always take a look at. Recycling program, do you have any questions on that? Hazardous waste, that collection's coming up, so you don't see much for expenses yet, but they're coming. Our parks, we're looking at the grant, or the park fees and revenues through the end of August. We're at $333,000. So last year we hit, we were at $365 at the same time. So we're just a little bit shy of where we've been, but we are budgeted at $381 compared to the $415 we hit the prior 2 years in a row. So might be down a little bit this year. Fairgrounds, that negative number is down to 26,667 on our way to zero. UW extension budget, nothing good there. Resource land and water, land and records. I don't think I have anything to highlight on those. Everything's going on target and on track. Economic development. And that rounds out the departmental financial report for August.
Okay, please hold your applause until the end. Thank you, Ken. Announcements and correspondence. What do we have? Anything, Ellen?
So just a handout for those of you about our appliance and electronics collection. It'll be Saturday, September 24th. This is a program that is all pass through. We do the promotion as part of our recycling grant, our recycling budget, but the vendors are the ones who, people pay the vendors direct. There's a few extra copies there if anyone wants them. And you can see it's in the town of Richmond. They're all the same day, but they're going to be in the town of Richmond, Glenwood City, and City of Hudson. So put that up. Another program we've just got done talking about is our Clean Sweep Hazardous Waste Collection. That will be October 6th, Thursday, October 6th, and Friday, October 7th. And again, you can see how we do it. This one will have residents, farm and business, and talks a little bit about how the farms and businesses this year will be going directly to logistics recycling, trying to transition there a little bit. And you can see, as I mentioned, the hours, 1 to 6 p.m. for residents on Thursday and noon to 4. We could cut back on the hours as a way to manage if we were cut back on funding. Another handout is Halloween at Homestead. Last year, we did our first ever event. We had, over 700 people attended. And we did count those people, and it was pretty amazing. It was a really big hit with people. And so we're having it again Sunday, October 30th from 2 to 5 p.m. We did move it up an hour in order to not end up going after dark. And we think it'll be a lot of fun. It should be very fun for the kids. It'll be at Homestead Parklands on Perch Lake. And I did have just one other announcement I wanted to make. Our revenues on parks probably will be down just a little bit this year, hopefully not very much. But if anyone knows anything, we're trying to promote it, and maybe you've seen it on our Facebook page. But we have unfortunately been hit this year with 5 thefts of our fee safes, where people have stolen them. And so we're looking at alternatives, and we will be doing that. But right now, we have quite a few locations in our parks where we aren't collecting any admission fees because we don't have fee safes but not our 2 main parks where we use staff people to do that. So just wanted to let you know that if there was any question, that'll be an element. And that's not an agenda item, so if I can answer a question later, or,
We can't really go into it.
yeah, just thought that you should know. Thank you.
What do we want to see on the next agenda? Requests for future agenda items?
And maybe this has been taken care of because I missed last month's meeting, but we had the group of people who were along the Wildwood Trail that were wondering about a letter they got. Has that ever been addressed? Has that ever been cared for?
We can, I think it would be, why don't you call the director and ask her the question? Probably be simpler to handle it that way. So I know that it's been handled, and I think you'd be satisfied if you did it that way. And I don't mean to minimize it as an agenda item, but some things take the path of least resistance. And then if you decide you want it on the agenda, why we can do that way. Any other thoughts? We will have an agenda, we'll cobble together an agenda for this work session and come up with a date by Monday or no later than Tuesday, but we have to talk to Sean and make sure that, Ryan, you work during the day also, and we all have busy schedules. We need to put together a date that works for all of our staff and ourselves. And I'd like to do that probably within 2 or 3 weeks and get that done. The date of the next Community Development Committee meeting is Thursday, October 20th, and we stand adjourned. Thank you all very much.